Hey, Steve Mignani here doing the junkyard crawl at Bernardston Auto Wrecking in Bernardstown, Massachusetts with a 1941 Buick Series 40 Super. Now, 1941 was a pretty big year for Buick. In styling up front, 1940 would have had standalone headlights in a pod. 1941, the headlights finally went into the fender in an envelope styling theme and would never come back out. So the old days of the exposed headlights slowly went away and melted into what we see here starting in 41. This again is the base model, the Series 40. There was also the Series 50 Super, the Series 60 Century, the Series 70 Roadmaster, and the Series 90 Limited. There was no Series 80. I don't know what that was about. But with that said, these all had straight 8 engines. All Buicks did from 1931 through 1952. And these are going to be 3-speed manuals. The first automatic, the Dynaflow, would come along in 1947 for Buick. So 3-speed manual. More on that in a second. But the big thing on this is, again, the styling. The headlights finally incorporated into the fenders. As we see right here, no more stand tall pods as in 1940. And again, 1942 was an abbreviated model year. Of course, the Pearl Harbor bombing was a major thing. World War II happened. Speaking of bomber planes, anyway, this is interesting. Under the hood, let's take a peek and see what we find. Yeah, the big straight 8. Now this car being a Series 40, that is going to be a 248 cubic inch B-52 bomber flying overhead. The bomb bay doors are open and 5, 4, 3, 2, oh good, it's gone. We live, cool. All right, anyway, here it is, the 248 cubic inch inline 8. And these have been described as a wall of an engine by some, similar to a locomotive engine. But the beauty of the big straight 8 Buick, either in 248 cubes or 320 cubes on the Century up, was its ability to sit and idle. You could actually rest a nickel on edge on the valve cover. It would just sit there and chug away. But again, lots of torque. And the beauty of the straight 8 was the fact that it was an effortless low RPM engine. It just basically would lug away from a stoplight and with no shudder, no vibration, a very quiet kind of an engine. Meanwhile, Chevrolet had an inline 6, Ford had little V8s and stuff, but the big 8 like this was probably the best way to go for smoothness. Now, if you didn't want to have low performance or base performance, this is a 1941 Buick catalog. Here it is right here, all new nose for 1941 when it was a new car. And we can see here the integrated headlights in the grille. Then now, kind of sad to see the decrepit nature of this thing now. But again, on the inside of this, it gives us a nice look of the various touches and features. Here's the interior. We'll get to that in a second. But mohair and lucite plastic for the first time seen inside. Plastic was a miracle material as carbon fiber is today. But here's the whole lineup inside of this thing here. And again, from the left, we have the Special, the Series 40, the Super, Series 50, and then the Centuries. Century C. And again, Century was a reference to the fact that these cars were the small body, but they had the big 320 from the full-size cars, and were the first Buicks to be able to go 100 miles per hour, or the Century, 100 miles per hour, Century, Roadmaster, Limited, and all these different bodies. And here we see here, the antenna, says here on all closed models, the radio antenna, an accessory, you paid extra, is connected above the windshield, controlled from within the car. More on that in a second. But on the back cover of this thing is something very important. We can see here, Buick's suspension system, and here's compound carburation, which was a possibility. In fact, on both engines, the 320 would give you 165 horsepower. The 248 we see here would be 125 horsepower with the twin carbs, two barrels. And the idea there was that you would have a second carburetor for passing and better fuel economy theoretically. But 115 horsepower seen here, thanks to the fact it's the single 2-barrel. But look underneath here, we see coil spring suspension and that torque tube right there, the coil springs. We'll get to that in a second. It's good and it's bad. We'll find out why in a minute. But again, the one thing that's kind of weird about Buicks, we can see here on the firewall, this little support right here that flops to either side, left or right. And here we see linkage and latches on the driver's side and the passenger side. Believe it or not, the hood on this thing, the way it's raised here, this is not how it's supposed to be. Believe it or not, these hoods were meant to open like that, or like that. And that was the design of those hinges. And the point of it was, in service, you could open it up to access the induction side or the ignition side. So an interesting thing, I can't think of another American car that had a hood that opened either way by design. Let's take a walk around the side on this thing. You can see the big drum brakes, no disc brakes in Buicks until you get into the mid-60s, but here's one of those massive, about a 12-inch drum right there. Very narrow, it's a stamped steel piece, and the wheels bolt on, no studs. Here's that coil spring front suspension. We can see the no ball joints yet. These still have king pins. And something new for 1941, along with the concealed headlights in the fenders, was concealed running boards. In 1940, the running board would be a rubber piece, but the bodywork extended down to cover them in 1941 for the first time seen here. And inside we can see the 120 mile an hour speedometer, kind of optimistic with the 248 single carburetor setup. With the Century, the 320 with the twin carbs, you could certainly go 100 miles an hour in one of these things. And notice this has the 3-speed manual on the column, and all Buicks were floor shifted until 1938. So the column shifter was kind of a new feature for 1939 onward, and it allowed the center passenger not to be violated as the shifter was being utilized to go through the gears. Now, this is a 4-door sedan, of course, many of them were, and here in the back, I hate to do any harm to this stuff, here's the big back seat area, pretty big. And we can see a lot of squirrels and other rodents have made a lot of life in here. It's good to see that it's not going to waste. Pretty flat floor. You can see right there the floor does not have a big hump in it. And again, that's a big part of the torque tube. Speaking of which, let's go to the rear wheel. You can see the fender is off, which gives us a nice look. But if we stick the camera down through here, the rear axle is inside the car, coil springs as we saw in the pictures, but the torque tube goes up to the back of the transmission. And it's good and bad, but the bad part comes down to this. This is Christie and Thompson's technical review of the 40 Buick. Christie and Thompson were a major automotive service business in Worcester, Mass, and they'd come up with their own things. And they're just, tips on how to service your new car. And on this one here, check out, it says here, clutch removal, all series. Remember, no automatic. It says remove rear axle assembly. Why? Well, the torque tube traps the transmission. So if you want to access the clutch, you got to pull the torque tube, which means pulling the rear axle, the coil springs out and back to then drop the tranny and get to the clutch. So kind of a nuisance from a standpoint of service. American Motors products, really anything with a torque tube, it's kind of a nuisance like that. But again, we see it happening here. On the back of this, one of the first uses of plastic taillight lenses. I won't break this, but that's not glass right there. That's plastic. And a year or two earlier, that would have been a glass casting. We see on the back here, Buick 8. Love that enamel. How pretty is that? Looks great right there. It's still in good shape. The enamel part is. The Buick 8, this red that would go around here, that's long gone. It's crystallized, but this would have been a red. But Buick 8 boasting the big inline 8, the locomotive engine under the hood. And inside the trunk, oh yeah. Okay, a nice fat trunk compartment. Spare tire would live right here in this well vertically, still leaving you a pretty good amount of room for the rest of your luggage and baggage. Let's see what we can find in here. Looks like we have, the rear view mirror, the remains of it. Kind of cool, or an earlier, this is a very small one, probably from a 1920s car, I would guess, but that's a rear view mirror, believe it or not, right there. Now rear view mirrors have, OnStar, radios, all kinds of GPS junk cameras and shit, but this is what they used to be. Kind of cool. Oh, a can of touch-up paint, a little spray paint, that's nice right there. Let's see what color it is. Oh, it's rust red, that's cool. Oh, you ever wonder what's inside a spray can? Check it out, tetanus. Here it is. That's the rattle ball. You gotta love it, the junkyard. It's a classroom and a junkyard. All right, so let's go around here to this side. And once again, the big 4-door body style. Now this one here, here's the hubcap and trim ring seen on the Special. No full wheel covers at this point in time, but here is, here's the hubcap, as it were. Kind of a weird thing. It's a rustable steel here, but a stainless steel face. So they age at different rates, clearly. And again, we can see here the bolts that hold the wheel on at the back. And Buick, kind of interesting, a one-piece axle right here, semi-floating, I guess you call that, bearing on the outside, but no hub, no stud, getting the brakes off, no problem, no tool needed. Do no harm, as they say in the operating room. And then inside, once again, there it is, the beautiful mohair mofo interior on this one here, flat floor. Again, that was the whole point of the torque tube, was that the pinion entered and engaged the ring gear very low, which allowed the drive shaft to be pretty low and gave you a nice flat floor. And here's some of that lucite interior trim that we see right here. That's plastic, which was, you know, as exotic as carbon fiber is today. It doesn't light up, but the faux wood grain right here, this is actually a fake wood grain on the metal. Kind of a cool touch. When it was new, it was probably pretty nice to look at. And we'll look at, and here again, these are the concealed running boards right here. This material right here was not there in 40, but in 41, the metal came down and covered what used to be a rubber running board. And look at this, body by Fisher on the side of the seat down there, the Fisher crest, the Fisher brothers, of course. I think 4 brothers, the Fisher building in downtown Detroit. And here's the inside, the steering column. You can see the shift lever has been ripped off of there, so we can't really see it, but that's where the column shifter would be on the side. This car, I believe, might have been radio equipped. Not sure. The block-off plate might have been taken or the radio gone, but we come to the windshield. Right up here is where the antenna would go had it been radio equipped. And from inside, you would actually have a knob. You could turn it to better locate your station. And one final detail on this thing, I'm trying to figure out, we come around to this side here. Now, most Buicks previous to 1941 had a cowl vent. Right here inside, you'd pull a lever, this would open up, it would give you air inside the car. But on this one here, this is either rusted shut or, yeah, okay, maybe it did. Yeah, it did. Okay, this is the cowl vent, this thing right here. Inside the car, you pull a rod and this would open up. So ram air for the people, not the engine. And of course, the twin carburetors, we have to remember that Buick would have dual quads, but in the early 60s on the 425 and the Grand Sport Riviera and the Wildcat and stuff like that. But multiple carburetors, Buick was the only GM division with multiple carburation until you get in the 1950s. And we have it here in 1940 and 41. In Buicks as a possible option. So if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends. And if you want to see more Junkyard Crawl videos, by all means, hit the bell, which means you'll be alerted when the next video hits, which is tomorrow morning.